Hello everyone and welcome to our first lecture on our muscular system. In today's video, we're going to kind of go through an introduction / review of the skeletal muscle cell, as well as introduce you guys to the head, neck, trunk muscles and the models that we'll be utilizing for this week in lab. Now, just a reminder, your skeletal muscle, which is the primary focus for this class, is divided into the sort of Russian doll structure, where we have our skeletal muscle that's made up of a bunch of individual fascicles that are filled with muscle cells that again are just small cylinders filled with even more small cylinder organelles called myofibrils. And these myofibrils have sarcomeres running through them that are made up of our myofilaments, actin and myosin. Now, why do we talk about this in the gross anatomy lab? Well, in lab, I actually have a model that goes through the anatomy of the skeletal muscle cell. And for those of you that are still struggling with the concept of visualizing it for lecture, this really helps you kind of put it all together. So that's why we go through it here in lab. This is kind of what your skeletal muscle cell looks like. Again, it's a cylinder with more cylinders surrounded by connective tissues. So in lab this week, or when you have a chance during the unit, you'll be able to take a look at this in a three-dimensional form and hopefully help you understand all of the structures. And another bonus is because you will have the three-dimensional structure in front of you, you can practice running through the contraction cycle that we have to know for our lecture exam. And for those of you in physiology, you're going to have to know it for your lecture exam too. So this is a really great way to take sort of an abstract thought and apply it to a three-dimensional concept. All right, all done with that. Let's talk about the core of the content that we need to learn for our third lab unit. Again, the major focus of this unit is the gross anatomy of the muscular system. Where is the muscle? What does it do and how does it attach? We will be going through nerves that supply the muscles, blood vessels that supply the muscles in their requisite units. So we're not going to be doing that right now, even though that's traditionally how this is taught. So how do muscles work? Muscles work by contracting, and they are attached at either end to bones. Each end attachment is going to have a force exerted on it. And typically one end, though sometimes two, are going to cross a joint. When the muscle contracts, the force that's put on the tendons is not equal. So one end will move and the other will not. In the case of the biceps brachii, which we're observing over here, when the biceps contracts and shortens, it creates force. This force is going to pull on the insertion of that muscle and cause the bone to move. So it causes a joint action. In the case of the biceps, it inserts on the radial tuberosity here on your radius, and when it pulls on the radial tuberosity, you'll notice the angle of the elbow joint decreases, and as we all know from lecture, that is flexion. So the action of the biceps brachii would be elbow flexion. You'll notice the tendon up here where it attaches at the shoulder joint is not moving. So the point of attachment that doesn't move during the action is called the origin, and the point of attachment that moves during the action is called the insertion. And this is really, honestly, a great way to help yourself out when you get stuck either forgetting what the action of the muscle is, or you don't understand what the action is. Another cool thing about knowing your origins and insertions is it helps you, again, visualize what's going on. So even though you may not be able to see your bones and muscles in action, you can use your fingers and thumb, and I'll show you guys this in lecture, to kind of mimic that action. So what do we need to know? Again, as I always have, you guys will get a packet in lab after your exam today that will have all of the information that you need to know. Okay, this information is also in your lab manual on Canvas, and everything that is in that packet, as well as anything in your lab manual, in these lecture videos is fair game, but the majority of your information is coming from your packet. Students are going to be required to recognize and identify all of the muscles on that list and know all of their actions. For most, but not all, I would say at least 3/4 of your muscles, you'll need to know their origins and insertions. Okay. On the first page of this lab, which you've hopefully already read, I go through the exact process of how to be successful in learning this content. And we're going to go through that as well in lab together. I do have Quizlets available for you that are linked in your modules for identifications of the muscles, as well as actions, origins, and insertions. So you guys can practice at home. Again, reminder, Quizlet is a tool. It is not meant to replace your time with the models, the anatomage, the bones, etc. I will always have a practice exam available. That'll be opened the week before or 2 weeks before this upcoming unit exam, and it's in your Lab 8 modules. So you guys will have access to practice. And then of course, model study guides. So I do have keys to the models, but as you guys have noticed, excuse me, or will, a lot of times the numbers rub off. So you guys can utilize your model study guides to help you identify models in the lab room, or practice at home if you're unable to come into open lab and need some more time. Now this week we are focused on head, neck, trunk muscles. So we're going to start at the head. We're going to have muscles that are on our face, okay, and their origination site is primarily the bones or bony landmarks of the skull, though sometimes it's also the fascia within the face, and their insertions are typically in the skin. So the facial muscles that allow us to form expressions like raising our eyebrows, pursing our lips, wrinkling our chins, that is caused because instead of inserting into a joint or a bone, they're inserting into the skin. So when that muscle contracts, it causes the skin to move, and now we have a facial expression. With our neck muscles, anterior and posterior, their job is primarily to flex or extend. I was only thinking of the anterior here, but they can flex or rotate the neck, okay, if they're anterior, and then they're in the back on the posterior surface, they're going to typically extend your neck. Now the ones that cause students the most trouble are the hyoid muscles. Your hyoid is a bone that we looked at last week in lab, the little bone that kind of floats in your neck, and knowing where the muscles are located in relation to the hyoid is going to be super helpful, not just for identification processes, but also for understanding the actions. So we have muscles, 3 that are above, supra, above the hyoid, and we have 4, though we're only going to look at 3 in lab, that are infra, or below the hyoid. So we know that if something is below, it's not going to pull up on the hyoid. That's physically impossible. And vice versa. If I have a suprahyoid muscle, it's not going to pull down on the hyoid. So just having that understanding and not rote memorization of location will help you on the tests, on the quizzes, when you have a brain fart, and to check yourself, okay? In terms of knowing where they are, it helps to know, hey, these are always going to be above the hyoid, these are always below the hyoid, so you can eliminate possible answer choices on a quiz or a test, okay? So again, this is looking at a bigger picture, not just narrowing in on a muscle, what does it do and how does it attach? You want to start looking at the whole picture. The other area we're looking at this week is our torso. So we have anterior torso muscles and posterior torso or trunk muscles. The ones that I kind of just briefly want to talk about are primarily our chest muscles. The abdominal muscles are really easy to ID and connect to because if you work out or have played sports, most of us are aware of where those muscles are and what they do. So that one's probably some of the easier muscles for the week. The muscles, that we find between our ribs, our intercostals, are often tricky to recognize because when we look at our models or even diagrams, they don't show up very much because they're fairly deep. They're beneath the pectoralis minor, they're beneath the serratus anterior, so we kind of just see these little slivers of muscle fibers. Now, one trick that's super duper helpful with identifications is to see how those fascicle bundles are moving. Okay, what's the orientation? And not just for your intercostals, because if you can recognize where they're flowing to or find the tendon, it helps you discern what you're looking at. So with our external intercostals, they're going to run to the outside of the chest wall. So the lateral side of your chest, they're going to flow at that sort of angle. That's an external. The internal intercostals, those fascicle bundles are going to run and point towards your sternum. So if they point towards the sternum, they're internal, and if they point towards the lateral surface of the chest wall, they're external. Okay, again, a thing to keep in mind as you're looking at your models this week. For our posterior and lateral muscles, their primary job is to move your scapula. I'm not going to focus too much on identifications because they're big. They're your trapezius muscle, they're your latissimus dorsi, they're big fat muscles, serratus anterior as well. They don't get lost like the hyoid muscles do. But these are the muscles, for those of you that go to the gym, that you're typically using when you're doing, say, shoulder shrugs or lat pull downs. Okay, or if you've done physical therapy like I have, your serratus anterior is a very important muscle because it helps stabilize the scapula on the side. So it helps kind of pull the scapula forward. So the reason I focus on these scapular movements for these muscles is, again, for physical therapy. One of the most commonly injured joints is your shoulder, typically the rotator cuff, and we want to strengthen the entire joint. So that means stabilizing not only the shoulder joint itself, but strengthening all the muscles that help keep your scapula in place. Because if you're someone like me whose joints pop out all the time, strengthening the muscles everywhere around that joint is super, super important. So just kind of keep that in mind as you guys are looking at the muscles and trying to visualize what they do. That's kind of why I gave you this diagram here, in case you're having a hard time visualizing what we mean by rotation and retraction. These are the models we're going to be working with this week. We have Pat, our big model. We have Andreas Vessalis and some of our other torsos that I could not fit on here, our head models, and of course, we're going to see and try to squeeze in an anatomage activity this week as well to help you guys with some of the facial muscles that are a little bit difficult to find, as well as to help you guys visualize your hyoid muscles. So I'll see you guys in lab and good luck on your bone test this week. See ya.